you were on the front line when another key event happened in clinical genetics that almost like stopped the party before it got started. Because here on Genetics for Healthcare, a central premise that we hold is, innovation doesn't mean much if patients can't access it. And in the 90s, there was an innovative company that reportedly sequenced, I guess I can say that in air quotes. So at the time, they sequenced the BRCA1 and the BRCA2 genes. And they were awarded patents. And they started to market a product that was reported as the first test that provided evidence of the connection between a genetic variant and risk of developing breast and ovarian cancer. There's good and there's bad about this stuff. The good is the data demonstrated that if a woman has a BRCA1 or 2 mutation, or a male has a BRCA1 or 2 mutation, it increased risk. But specifically, the data on this particular product showed that it increased the risk of a woman developing breast cancer by 50 to 80%, certainly big news, and ovarian cancer by 20 to 50%. That's a good thing to know that you have that risk, and there's modifying lifestyle measures, preemptive procedures that you can do to prevent a cancer diagnosis. Now, the bad part of that was that company aggressively blocked other researchers in labs who were further researching the BRCA gene to create more innovations, because there was a lot more to learn that maybe was unknown at that time. And thankfully, on June the 13th, 2013, the Supreme Court issued an unanimous ruling that said, in part, that individual genes are beyond the domain of patent protection. Can't patent a gene. And then secondly, in that ruling, it was said that genes are elements of nature, free to all men and reserved exclusively to none. Now, I got kind of a two-part question for you. Sorry for the preamble there, Dr. Esplin, but what was the potential downside of those patents being able to stand? And then secondly, what did the invalidation of those patents unlock or enable for scientists like yourself and providers, and ultimately, of course, patients?
You bet. Very important questions, and I'll also note I have some affinity for those individuals who had, of course, discovered the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes, in part because that work was done at the University of Utah. And to your point, right, Myriad Genetics, based out of Salt Lake City, Utah, had then gone on to effectively commercialize this. And I'll give a certain amount of credit to Myriad Genetics, because I think it was based upon their ability to patent that they were able to develop a functional business model, which really laid a lot of groundwork for the utilization of genetics in clinical practice in a way that I think really hadn't been done prior to that. And so, yes, there is a great deal of credit that is due in that respect. At the same time, as you've alluded to, that did represent an obstacle, in my opinion, to innovation in that regard, because the testing that was being done, it was, and understandably, right, at the time that they started doing this testing, right, it was definitely like the leading edge of technology, right? It was the leading edge of medical science. It was really a complete game changer, just like you alluded to, for individuals who had breast cancer, and especially those who had a family history of breast cancer that followed the pattern that they had identified in hereditary breast and ovarian cancer syndrome, to be able to get tested, to understand that that is indeed what was causing their cancer. And that laid some of the groundwork for development of therapeutics later on. At the same time, it set a bar to access that was the cost of the testing itself. And it also made it very difficult, if not impossible, for other both researchers and commercial entities to research and develop advancing technologies that would do the job of genetic testing for BRCA1 and 2 or other genes and other conditions better, faster and less expensively. And I
Mhm.
speak of that in part too because I had joined Invitae right around that period of time, and one of the questions in the minds of those that were leading Invitae at the time was, is this going to be overturned, and will it persist in being overturned in terms of will this opportunity be opened to others to provide testing and eliminate the literal monopoly that Myriad Genetics had. And so that presented an obstacle to innovation, to advancing both the technology and as well as to reducing the barriers of cost, for example, to patients to receive access to genetic testing and the genetic information that was critical there. And when that decision was made, it literally opened the floodgate for those who were ready, such as Invitae and others, to get in there and use the advances that technology had provided at that point in time, and really to apply NGS technologies with the dramatic, I mean, literally exponential cost savings that those represented to clinical genetics, to get genetic testing that much more readily available to patients in the clinics, to physicians who are seeing these patients, and not just for BRCA 1 and 2 at that point in time, right? There was already at that point in time a lot more that had been understood about hereditary colon cancer, such as Lynch syndrome, for hereditary epilepsies and other rare diseases, and everything was, to a certain extent, being held up by that patent, which, when it came down, those floodgates didn't just benefit folks with breast cancer. It benefited really everybody who had a familial condition or a known genetic condition that really would benefit from genetic testing.
So that was that is really rich what you just kind of articulated there, because it's one thing, and it's fair to say that they were able to commercialize and build the business and be the first to actually successfully commercialize something for patient access. But of all the other things that you mentioned, it's one thing to create a product, another thing to market it and create user demand. But it's also a quite another thing to generate the evidence that makes it relevant, actionable for healthcare providers, to make treatment decisions or wellness decisions. And certainly the evidence is needed for payers, healthcare insurance companies, and employers who are going to pay for those tests.